and another very special night with William Mills Tompkins. Bill and I have been holding forth for quite some time now, and what Bill is doing is bringing to you the planet, the world. Those of you who care, and those of you certainly with the background in physics to understand these things, will be amazed. What we're presenting is another database dump of 4 separate PDFs. You'll find them at Rense. Look under guests under Bill's name, or look in the center of the top of the home page for the deep space image. You'll see there all the data is there, and you're invited to take your time in the coming days, weeks, and months to read through these documents, which are basically, they're being provided by Bill, and they are from the early 1950s. And they refer and allude back to things in science, back to the teens, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. They are absolutely extraordinary. Where do they come from? Douglas Aircraft Corporation, where Bill and many others worked, including a number of Germans who came over here after the war's end to bring their brilliant scientific genius to donate to the American cause, to get into space as the Cold War with Russia heated up. They had the first satellite, of course, Sputnik, in 1957. We followed not too long after that. But it has been a war. It has been an incredible adventure. Bill Tompkins has lived several lifetimes on the edge of the most modern, phenomenal science, not to mention espionage technology and wisdom that were brought back here during the war by Germans of American descent who volunteered to go over into Germany, into the Third Reich, and spy. And they brought back things that were astonishing. And Bill was invited and participated in the debriefing of these people at North Island in San Diego, along with Admiral Rico Bata. These are amazing events, and we have memorialized them all in prior radio programs for your listening enjoyment. We also have 3 YouTube videos up there from 3 of the different programs. In fact, the most recent program with Bill. You can take a look at those. My editors put those together. They're up at the Rense YouTube channel and on the main page with the deep space photo at the top of Rense.com. Hello, Bill. Welcome back.
Hey, how goes everything? I'm ready to go.
Good. All right. You know what I'd like to do before I start reading from some of these papers, which for you listeners, again, are above or were, and maybe they still are in some cases, top secret. They were so secret that they weren't even classified. That's one way to try to hide things out. They were involved with the Douglas Aircraft Corporation, deep black programs, which I mean were hidden away, compartmentalized, that Bill had access to and was working with for years. So we're going to talk about those. But before that, we teased last time a subject which I'd like to spend a little bit of time on if we can, Bill, and that's this story, and it's been running around for a long time, of underground tunnels and caverns under Los Angeles, under Bel Air, under Brentwood, under downtown L.A., which, according to ancient Indian legend, were inhabited and built by reptilians or reptile-type people. Did you ever come across, in all of your time in these above secret operations, any information about these tunnels or structures? Anything about prior existence of advanced species in the L.A. area, underground or above ground for that matter?
Interesting question. It just so happens that I sort of got involved in that.
Uh-huh.
And let me go back to the beginning of where I was exposed to essentially an area on Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills, which is where my dad had his office. And directly below that was a very large tavern. And I found out about my dad's involvement on this years after I had finished the work at TRW. So what I'm going to say here is that at Douglas, again, we had a program which was involved in both the Air Force and the Navy. And this was addressing extraterrestrial threats. So the Air Force was involved in that they were operating on a different frame or a different schedule than the Navy.
They were completely separate, running along parallel paths, so to speak?
Yes, it was hard to understand because it seemed they were both working together, but they really weren't. In a way, they were in sort of competition.
Got it.
So what took place was that the Air Force had their facilities controlled in the Pentagon like the Navy. And they had a very large Air Force base out on the desert, Palmdale area, where they were testing all of their new aircraft. And just north of that, and this is off of Highway 395 that runs from Los Angeles to Reno to get up to Lake Tahoe, where everybody goes on vacation.
It's a beautiful road up the backside of the Sierras. It's great country.
Yeah, gorgeous country. Okay. So the Air Force had some of their facilities underground like the Navy did at the Naval Research Facility, which was only about 35 miles north of the Air Force's facility. So the Navy were operating and expanding along with Caltech and JPL and all these other companies helping them on the programs. And the Air Force had some of the same people, even Lockheed, involved. And the Air Force was expanding a small cavern into an area near the runway that they had, but probably about 2.5 miles just east and northeast. And they broke into a tunnel. And this tunnel was quite large. In fact, it was the Air Force diggers. There's one, I forget the page number in my book, selected by extraterrestrials, but there's a photograph of the Air Force's digging machine. And so they're digging their tunnels, and they break into a much larger tunnel, which led them to an enormous cavern, which is northeast of both the Navy facilities and the Air Force facilities.
The China Lake, Bill? Would that be China Lake?
China Lake.
So just for our listeners, that's out in the the upper Mojave Desert, and it's really desolate out there. There's not much going on. Except underground there is.
Yes, and so they broke into this large one, and it wasn't being used by anybody at that time. However, later on, of course, they found that these tunnels had wide curves. They weren't sharp curves like the Air Force dug their tunnels. And turned out that the extraterrestrials have very, very large tunnels all over the planet. And there happened to be one which was very large just north of Highway 395 and between north of both the Navy's facility and the Air Force. So the Air Force fellows then wanted a tunnel from the Pentagon to their Air Force facility on the desert, and then another tunnel to run from there to Vandenberg Air Force Test Center, where the Air Force was testing their missiles on the California coast.
Yes, I watched probably hundreds of launches. I lived in Santa Barbara and certainly Lompoc, and Vandenberg, 45 miles north, something like that. You could see them, and that was an amazing thing to watch. It also is interesting to know that that was the end or a nexus of the tunnel system that runs all across this country. And for those of you new to the program, just keep an open mind. These tunnels are easily diggable with the technology they had in the 60s and 70s. Now what they've got probably is a joke, but they do connect the Pentagon to China Lake, to Vandenberg, White Sands. They go all over the place to these top-secret facilities, and they're connected by high-speed, probably maglev type of transit systems. And they go like a bat out of Hades. They move fast. Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, the early ones, they used railroad
right, traditional,
rails,
yeah.
And so they operated on the bottom of the tunnel. But of course, what they found was they broke into other tunnels, which were about 2.5 times the diameter, and these were had no highway in there, and they had no rails. So as they were monitoring these tunnels, which were built by the extraterrestrials, they found that their operating speed was just below the speed of sound.
Just subsonic. Interesting.
Just barely subsonic, almost sonic. And they didn't touch anything. Their systems were set up so that they could never, in any possible way, ever touch any of the walls of the tunnels with their electromagnetic control system. Turns out those tunnels went under the Atlantic Ocean. They went under Europe. They went under China. And they went under Japan. They came back and went under the Pacific Ocean and came back in and connected to other tunnels on the Pacific coast.
Wow.
And, of course, they went north to Alaska, and they went south to Antarctica. And the Antarctica tunnels from all locations was like a maze, because they had these coming from every country on Earth, on the outside of the planet. Inside, the extraterrestrials had very high-speed tunnels running to their bases, which were in massive tunnels under the ice and under the ground in Antarctica. So, oh my gosh, what did they find out later? There was a tunnel under Los Angeles that covered all of Southern California. San Diego, Santa Barbara, out over the desert. And this particular tunnel was an operating center. Now, it's very, very interesting that what we just said was the extraterrestrials had large tunnels and large caverns underneath what on the planet at that time was not aircraft companies, but aerospace engineering companies and biomedical advanced medical research facilities. And so it's interesting that that large tunnel gave them access to virtually everything that was going on from the 1920s on up to even today. And so these people, which were Draco reptilian type aliens, had been living in these large tunnels for at least 6,000 years. And so this is old stuff to them. And what was also found out was that the agenda of the Draco reptilians was not just an isolated program on planet Earth, but essentially it was operating, and if you can take your arm, everybody in the audience, take your arm and put it up over the front of your head and have your hand sort of facing out.
Okay.
Now, that's what a Milky Way galaxy arm looks like, okay? So in trying to visualize what we're saying here, you've got your arm running from your shoulder out in front of your face and up in the air. Planet Earth and our little small star sun is located 3 knuckles behind the tip of that arm of the Milky Way galaxy. And I think it's interesting if you could do that, then look at your fingers and then count back only 3 knuckles.
On which finger, Bill?
You can use any one of your fingers,
okay,
because they're all close.
All right, so just to do this, let me do this again. I'm holding my left arm, I'm left-handed, in front of my face, looking at the back of my palm with my palm spread. It's in front of my face, far enough where I can see it. And Bill is explaining
that about a foot away.
Yeah.
Get your hand about a foot away.
So the Milky Way looks like my arm with a hand on the end of it, so to speak, and we're stuck way out at the end, 3 knuckles down from pick any finger of the Milky Way. So we're at the end of one of the ends of it. I get the picture now. Thank you. And
so your body then is the center of the galaxy. So the Draco reptilians have been operating all over the Milky Way galaxy for thousands of years. And so the operation with which they're doing, primarily in the tunnels underneath the ground and the caverns, is they're simply initiating their missions, which they are operating on and have been on roughly 80% of that arm. The stars in that arm of the Milky Way galaxy, they are essentially, that's their property. They own that.
That's extraordinary. Wow.
And that trying to view this and simulate your mind, that's just one galaxy. Now, what we're really dealing with, when we're talking about caverns and tunnels, is that we're dealing with a group of 2 primary type extraterrestrials who have been operating for millions, hundreds of millions of time periods out in the galaxy.
Right.
And so they're not just doing this to the one arm of our galaxy. The point we're after here is that this galaxy is just one of billions of other stars planted in other galaxies that the Draco reptilians own. And the example of looking at your arm, that's a situation where if you will study the astronomy and the galaxies, most of them have arms. Not all of them. Some of them are just fog-shaped. But most of them have arms. And every 4 or 5 days, they throw off a whole group of stars at the tip of their arms as they're rotating. And sometimes other galaxies pick up those stars. So planet Earth, being located at the tip, are going to be thrown off in another couple of weeks. Well, maybe a little longer than that.
So we're going to be spun off at some point in I guess, kind of a centrifugal force, so to speak, and we'll head off into deep space and link up with another galaxy at some point. Let me go back to what you said about the Milky Way galaxy, which is a beautiful one. And from our perspective, of course, we're at the end of it, but we're looking through it. And you see that band of stars at night overhead. It is just a stunning sight. Now, the reptilians, the Draco reptilians, you say, operate within about 80% of the Milky Way galaxy. God only knows what they call it, but that's what we call it, the Milky Way. What other races are prominently visible on the landscape of advanced culture and civilization in this galaxy? Are the reptilians kings? Are the Nordics kind of like secondary? What does it look like to you? What do you know?
Well, we go back to the use of spaceship battle groups, which make up like a U.S. Navy battle group, okay? And that consists of a large aircraft carrier, 4 or 5 cruisers, maybe a half a dozen destroyers, and some submarines and support ships. Okay, that's basically an operating unit which the reptilians have and the Nordics have, and of course we now have 8 of those groups operating out in the galaxy. That's called solar orbit. So, answering your question, essentially, if you could say that the U.S. Navy has, say, 10 galaxies, 10 operating units in the galaxy, the Nordics have maybe 60 to 100, but the reptilians have several thousand. And
I see.
These are operating units, military, and what's interesting, I guess it's, the Air Force guys are going to hate me here, but what's interesting is that the Nordics space operations are naval. And oh my gosh, the Draco, the reptilian space battle groups are, no, they're naval. And so if you look at the planet where we are, because your very large percent of your planet is oceans, and the best way to handle problems from a military standpoint is to use naval. But here we find that all these other people out there are doing the same thing, and they're being organized and operated as naval.
Oh, that is funny. That's very interesting.
But to try to get back to the tunnels, it turns out that there's obviously 2 sets of tunnels, 90% of which are extraterrestrial tunnels. And they do this on other stars' planets all the time, and they've been doing it for thousands of years.